Welcome to the webinar on teaching about September 11th, the September 11th education curriculum that is in Active Classroom. My name is Aaron Willis, and I'm going to be giving you your tour today, and I'm going to just highlight some of the activities that are available for teaching about September 11th that are included in your Active Classroom platform. So the first place we might begin is by going in and going to our search menu. The search menu allows in the Find Activities section to search by series title, and if you went in there under T, the September 11th education program is listed. You select that, you hit search, boom, and then it'll return a list of all the activities that are connected to that particular program. So you can see we've got about 8 or 9 different lessons that come up that are connected to the September 11th education program. I'm going to recommend a couple of them for you today, but I want you to be aware that there are others available that really stretch across different topics and allow you. The vision for this program was that September 11th would not just be taught as a memorial at the beginning of the school year. Now, clearly, we're here now because this is a good time to bring it up and to introduce it to students, but what you find here are a number of lessons that could be incorporated into any U.S. history or government course at any time during the year, because they really bring up a number of different issues ranging from what actually happened on September 11th, U.S. foreign policy and foreign relations and how that is related to September 11th, as well as things like creating monuments or honoring heroes or civic advocacy. So there's really a range of different topics, and you can see just from the titles here that we're really able to dig in and offer you some variety in terms of what you're able to work with. The place I'd like to start, though, is with the lesson called the Remembrance Presentation, and just going back to the previous screen, we can see that it is right here, September 11th Education Program, Remembrance Presentation. The reason I like this is because it's really a quick way to offer students an understanding, sort of what I call a three-dimensional understanding of 9/11. The September 11th Education Program was developed by the United Families Group of the World Trade Center. These were families that were affected by the disaster and lost loved ones or were survivors. And they came up with an educational mission which included 80 hours worth of interviews of people who were there, whether they're survivors or loved ones or had some interaction with the events of that day. What you get is this multiple perspectives from multiple people. So this is really a wonderful way not to just introduce students to what happened on that day, but to tie it into lessons that have to do with oral histories, with how we create history, with working with primary sources. And I'll show you some of the lessons that tease that out momentarily. But the Remembrance Presentation is a 12-minute long video presentation that's meant to tell the story of the day of September 11th and what happened with the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and as well with the plane crashing in the field in Pennsylvania, in a way that gives students that three-dimensional perspective, hearing from people who are actively affected by that. So we really like that it's 12 minutes. It's sort of a manageable amount of time, and it comes along with a number of discussion questions. So if you go to the video section, you can launch the video from here. If you click on in the lower corner, you can, of course, go to full screen, and you can see that there are a number of questions here that can help facilitate a conversation. So this would be a great way if you wanted to dedicate a half hour or even a whole class period to talking about 9/11. You'd have this 12-minute introduction, and then you could choose from some of these different discussion questions as a way to engage your students. And you can see just by looking at the discussion questions that are now on the screen, they really range from things like number 2, how would you explain 9/11 today to somebody who was born on September 12, 2001? And in fact, I recognize that a number of your students out there may have been born even after that period, depending on whether you teach middle school or high school. So what would you explain to students? Other ones get in a more emotional point of view, a mother talking about the 4 words no mother should ever hear, and what that means to her, and whether this is a war. Was her child involved in a war? He was a firefighter. How is this similar or not? And then you have very interpersonal types of questions like number 5. Sometimes there aren't goodbyes. And here's somebody who lost his brother who's talking about what it was like to lose a brother and never having had that chance to say goodbye. So you really can take this in a number of different directions where students can ask questions about what actually happened on that day. They can try and articulate what that might look like to others, as well as getting into the emotional and the interpersonal side of things of, wow, what would it be like to have lost a loved one? You know, more than 3,000 people were lost on that particular day. How does that tie into the other people that were affected, that were related to them or worked with them? So remembrance presentation, a great place to start, could be shown at any time of year, really gives students a good introduction to what happened, and then along with the discussion questions, allows you to take that to the next level. Now, if we go back here, another one that I want to talk about, and this one's called The Historian's Craft, and it looks specifically at both timelines and personal narratives. So here's a lesson that really can develop skills that we want students to understand as, we'll call them amateur historians. If you were a historian trying to understand the period, you'd want to do interviews with people to understand what happened. They learn a little bit about what that process might be like to do an oral interview. One of the activities we'll see in a minute actually gives them a worksheet to go home and interview an adult who was alive on 9/11 and to find out what their perspective was of what happened. And so they're learning some of the skills that a historian might actually employ. At the same time, it's a valuable lesson here about comparing timelines and how timelines are not absolute things. Most timelines students are used to because they see them at the opening chapter of their textbook, and they say, okay, here's the time that we're covering in this chapter, and here's what happened. But this activity really shows us the different timelines and the content you put on the timelines and the beginning and the end of those timelines really changes the perspective of what those timelines mean. So this is a great activity for students to understand how organizing information, in effect, gives form to that information as well. Now, if you go back here and you click on this teacher's guide up here, which is downloadable, you'd end up with a document that looks similar to the one that I've loaded here, which we can see is nicely organized. You've got pull quotes, you've got an overview, you've got student goals and objectives, so everything you need to be successful in implementing this lesson, as well as all the lesson components, time allotments, so everything you need to really get you up and running. Now, one of the activities here is for students to compare 3 different timelines. So they're going to do their timelines of different scopes. On the one hand, here's a timeline that's offered in the 9/11 Commission report, which is essentially a timeline of what happened just on that day, September 11th, 2001. Now, students will compare that to a longer-term timeline, which goes back to December 1979 and tries to give a greater context to the whole rise of who is this Al-Qaeda and what did they do and how are they related to what we're trying to understand here. So you've got all of a sudden a timeline that has that wider look and comes through all the way up through the modern period. And then the third timeline is a timeline that's made up of videos themselves where the students see the video situated in a certain sequential order and they need to create their own timeline based on that. And there's a range of other activities, and I'd encourage you to go in, and as you look through the teacher's guide, it'll explain to you how to compare these different types and what the students will actually do with these timelines. But it really does help them understand how that organization of information may lead you to come up with different types of conclusions. Now, I mentioned one important part of this lesson is understanding that notion of oral histories. And so here's an example of the handout that comes with this. It's part of that PDF that you can download, or it's embedded in Active Classroom if you want the students to be able to put their answers or their responses directly in. to Active Classroom. But this is really designed as a question list for students to interview somebody, an adult who was alive at the time of 9/11, to try and get an idea of what their experiences were like. So the students are gaining more knowledge about 9/11. They're also getting a unique perspective. And we hope that when the students come back together in class, having done an assignment like this, that they can share the different perspectives and that you can get a sense of how different people have interpreted this. So we think there's a lot of value in the students being able to come back together and report back on who they interviewed and what they discovered, and so that we can see there might be a chance that you have some parents or somebody who was alive, an aunt or an uncle, who maybe thought this was some part of some big conspiracy, where others who saw this as part of an ongoing struggle between Islam and the West. There's any range of interpretations that can be out there, and this really allows you to offer students to understand that there are multiple perspectives out there. And hopefully, as they dig deeper into the contents and they hear from the interviews that are embedded, that they'll come to their own conclusions about the role of 9/11 and where it fits in U.S. history. Another activity that I wanted to focus on, this one, very visual. A number of you have students that respond much better to visual prompts, and so this one looks at both photographs from the day and asks students to compare denotative versus connotative aspects of those photographs. The denotative being the facts, what do you actually see there? Connotative meaning the emotional things that it invokes. And helping students now to understand as they work through a primary source what it might be like to compare or contrast the differences between factual versus emotional analyses as they go through and look at these images. For those of you that have been active in Active Classroom, you know that you can turn on for any set of images your magnifying glass, and the students can use that as a way to dig deeper, to gather evidence, like maybe a detective might gather evidence at the scene of a crime, or you can have a class-wide discussion by going to full screen or breaking it up into quadrants, that you do have different options for looking at these visual resources. And here's an example of an image that the students might have to analyze. What's connotative? What's denotative? Denotative, what are the facts that you observe here? Connotative, what do you think? How does it make you feel? What are the emotions that this draws from? Also, what can you infer from this? What is not obvious in the image that you can read into it and make guesses about? And all of those are going to be transferable skills that students can use in any period of history that they're studying, not just 9/11, but any period in U.S. or world history where they need to understand the role of primary sources and what they can do to help us understand on a more meaningful level what actually happened. Also, we can go in and we can divide up photographs. Here's a way to just divide it up into quadrants and look at one quadrant at a time, helping students to analyze and really draw as much detail as they can out of these images. When they get to the oral histories, they'll have they'll have both a graphic organizer for helping them keep track of the interviews that they're focusing on, and then they'll have a choice to choose from one of these 4 different individuals who are talking about what they experienced on that day. So once again, that reinforces the ideas of the students having done their own oral histories with other adults, and now being able to hear, on the one hand, from a survivor, on the other hand, from a photographer of that day. Here's another photographer, and then Senator Clinton, the representative from New York at the time, talking about what she experienced. So we can see 4 or 5 different perspectives here that are offered through this activity, and the students are encouraged to both dig deep in terms of what they see, as well as to compare between the different accounts of what happened on that day. I think the teacher's guide recommends breaking students up into small groups and having them work with different oral narratives and then having them come back together. Students can watch the video, but also the complete transcript of what they say is down here below. So they can both read it, and watch it, so you can support all different types of student learning. Now finally, the last thing I wanted to show you today, I just highlighted 3 lessons out of the 7 that are included. I'll encourage you to explore on your own. but I wanted you to be aware that we do have an online course for teaching about September 11th, which gives you a much deeper understanding of what happened at the time, and is also available for graduate level credit. All you need to do is request this to be added, and if you go in, you can see that you can go through here. It includes a number of different weeks of modules that ask you to engage with the content, and this is a wonderful way to develop your own professional learning and get college credit for it at the same time that you're getting a better idea of the resources that are involved in the September 11th education program that you're able to use with your students. So that pretty much summarizes the main things that I wanted to show today. I hope that you'll be encouraged to dig in and take a close look at the resources available for teaching about September 11th with your students.